Stephen formed a thought in his mind. "Can you command the flood dragon like what you did with the beasts?" "Not right now," the ice dragon replied. "It reached a breakthrough in its cultivation, and its spiritual world is unstable." The threadworms were enormous, but they were like caterpillars compared to the massive flood dragon. A dark mist enveloped the dragon, and it transformed into an enchanting young man. His hair was jet black, his skin was pale, and his eyes were as bright as stars. "It's been a long time since I've met an Asura. Trespassing on the mountain is a serious crime. It just so happens I made a breakthrough in my cultivation today. I'll use your blood to celebrate." The flood dragon released its aura. It was filled with unrestrained, murderous intent. The Asaurus took a cautious step back. The elder didn't expect the flood dragon to have reached this stage in its cultivation. It would take too much time to kill it. Ever since they set foot on the Myriad Mountains, obstacles had blocked their path time and time again. At this rate, he didn't know how long it would take for them to find the exorcist. "You're no match for us," the elder threatened. "Leave, or you'll regret it." The flood dragon smirked. "You think you have the upper hand because of your numbers? If we fought one-on-one, I would have killed you instantly." The dragon vanished and reappeared in front of the elders. Its arms twisted and wrapped around the elder's neck like its body was devoid of bones. When the elder struck the dragon's arm with his palm, he felt like he was hitting rubber. The force behind his strike dissolved into nothingness. The Asuras infused their inner energy into their swords and pointed their blades towards the sky, manifesting a dome of light. It absorbed the spiritual energy of the mountain to increase its power. The dome shattered, and fragments of light bombarded the flood dragon. Craters appeared on the rocky terrain. The dragon maneuvered its flexible body into unusual positions. The fragments brushed past its skin harmlessly. "I'll show you how powerful dragons really are." The flood dragon pointed upwards. The trees parted, and sunlight filtered into the forest. Dark storm clouds gathered overhead, and a clap of thunder shook the sky. Stephen couldn't let the flood dragon wipe out the Asuras. He needed them to find the exorcists. The ice dragon appeared in a flash of blue light. "The flood dragon's spiritual world has been stabilized. I'll see what I can do." The ice dragon was from the dragon realm. It didn't evolve through cultivation like the flood dragon. The clouds flashed. Lightning struck the Asuras and seared their skin, leaving their clothes in tatters. They looked like they'd just come out of a furnace. Their dome of energy was no match for the lightning. It disappeared within minutes. The flood dragon snickered. "Your subordinates are useless. Beasts and Asuras have been divided since ancient times. You should have thought it through before trespassing on our territory." The elder was enraged. His team had utterly disgraced him, but he still needed them. Fortunately, none of them were dead from the lightning. He tightened his grip on the sword and lunged. The flood dragon had shifted into human form, and it was hard to gauge its weaknesses. Just as another intense battle was about to break out, the storm clouds parted. A silhouette of the ice dragon loomed overhead. Its fearsome aura swept the forest. The flood dragon abandoned its battle with the elders and scurried into the cover of the forest. It peered out from behind a tree and called out to the ice dragon timidly. "I apologize for not realizing you were here. I just made a breakthrough in my cultivation and got carried away. I had no intention of causing a commotion." The elder was stunned at the arrival of another dragon. The flood dragon was troublesome enough. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Follow me," the elder whispered to his team. "We're heading out the other side of the mountain." In the blink of an eye, the Asuras disappeared from the forest. The ice dragon descended from the clouds in a pale blue ball of light. It shifted into a young man dressed in white when it reached the ground. The ice dragon was naturally superior to the flood dragon because of its pure bloodline. If you start a fight every time you progress in your cultivation, you'll land yourself in big trouble one day. You might be strong, but there's always someone more skilled. The Asuras are no joke. Aren't you worried about antagonizing them? The flood dragon shrank back from the ice dragon's intimidating aura and shuffled further behind the tree. There was no trace of its arrogant demeanor from earlier. "Thank you for your concern. I was only trying to teach the Asuras a lesson. They've been slaughtering the beasts near the mountain and using them as food and raw materials to forge weapons." "Why didn't you and the other beasts join forces and rebel against the Asuras?" the ice dragon asked. "You outnumber them." The flood dragon sighed helplessly. Our numbers don't give us the advantage. The Asuras have been developing specialized weapons. Their cannons utilize energy from ores and crystals to amplify its powers. Not all of the beasts possess intelligence. I'm no match for their weapons either. That's why I'm hiding on this mountain. The Asura King created this realm. Ideally, all species would have been equal. But the Asuras were an unorthodox bloodline, and it was inevitable for them to rule the realm. Stephen understood the Flood Dragon's concerns. He'd personally tested the bomb created from ores and crystals, and it was undoubtedly destructive. The Asuras could blow up the entire realm if they wanted to. Why don't we work together? If we get rid of the Asuras, you and the other beasts can take over the realm. The Flood Dragon's eyes narrowed. Judging from Stephen's appearance, it was obvious he was from the human realm. You want to get rid of the Asuras? Do you know how powerful they are? They're out of your league. The Ice Dragon's voice sounded in Stephen's mind. Stronger beasts have a tendency to isolate themselves, especially those with intelligence. They don't like joining in groups. Based on the Asura realm's history, for the beasts to join forces, we'll have to first engage in an internal battle between species. The strongest will come out on top and become the leader. That's the only way to unify the beasts and overthrow the Asuras. It was clear that rallying the beasts to fight the Asuras was an impossible task. The more conflict there was in the Asura realm, the harder it would be for Stephen's team to move around without being noticed. Stephen changed the topic to the exorcists. The Flood Dragon lived in the underground rivers that spanned the mountain range. There were no secrets it didn't know. The dragon had seen the exorcists fetch water by the stream several times and knew where they lived. Stephen's team followed the Flood Dragon through the depths of the mountain and arrived at a snowy peak on the other side. The sound of nature and beasts disappeared. The snowy landscape was eerily quiet. The three exorcists, Luan, Drew, and Rio, were enjoying their wine at the summit when they noticed the uninvited guests. You're the dragon that lives in the rivers. We don't have anything to do with each other. Why are you here? I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm here to warn you, the Flood Dragon said. Your techniques are rare, but you can't hide forever. Haven't you noticed that the Asuras are searching everywhere for you? The three exorcists placed their wine cups on the stone table. Their emotions didn't fluctuate. They were as serene as the landscape around them, but their auras were rising rapidly. Every slight movement could kill. There were rumors that no one had lived to tell the tale after they witnessed an exorcist's attack. Even the four chiefs would have to tread carefully in front of them. Stephen materialized his sword. He wasn't confident, but he had to try. The fate of the human realm was on the line. Luan's gaze shifted to Stephen, Liam, and Ezra. You three must be skilled to have gotten this far, but don't get ahead of yourselves. Luan stood up and stretched. As the oldest brother, it was only right for him to handle the uninvited guests. He walked over to Stephen and casually flicked his wrist. A gust of wind swept the summit. Stephen dispersed the wind with his sword, but that wasn't the end of it. He suddenly felt empty. His inner energy was depleting at a rapid rate. It was a familiar feeling that reminded him of the person he used to be before becoming a martial artist. Now that you know what we're capable of, right? Luan asked. You have no chance of winning. Stephen gritted his teeth. He couldn't give up here. He materialized the illusory pearls and sent them careening towards Luan. There was no impact when they collided. The dazzling gems lost their brilliance and tumbled into the snow like ordinary stones. Stephen's inner energy dissipated from the gems, and he could no longer remotely control them. He resorted to unleashing waves of energy with his sword. Luan didn't move an inch, but every wave dissipated when they touched him. Stephen's inner energy drained faster as the fight dragged on. He condensed the energy from the Killen's core into a layer of flames on his skin and casted his domain of hellfire. Blue flames spread over the summit, absorbing the spiritual energy of the mountain. Luan eyed the blue flames in disdain. That's a poor imitation of our technique. An exorcist can remove the existence of spiritual energy like it was never there. He waved his hand. A gentle breeze swept the summit, and the blue fire vanished. Stephen gasped in pain as his surroundings blurred. The backlash from the sudden destruction of his domain was severe. His remaining inner energy was thrown into disarray. Stephen staggered, and Liam and Ezra rushed over to steady him. "Should we fight him together?" Liam asked. Stephen took a deep breath and shook his head. "No, we're no match for him or the other two." He materialized a talisman and threw it at Luan. It exploded inches away from his face. Luan spread his hands, and the explosion froze, as if time had stopped. It shrank, and the fire dimmed. It faded out of existence in less than a minute. The exorcists were capable of destroying anything that possessed energy. The talisman's explosion should have destroyed the summit, but only a few snowflakes were blown away. Luan dusted his hands. "Your cultivators from the human realm aren't that bright. Even the chiefs of the 4 major tribes have to treat us with respect. You can barely hold your own against them, but you came all the way here to kill us? I'll let you go, because this is our home. I don't want your dirty blood polluting the mountain." Stephen was surprised that the exorcist was letting them off easy. They weren't bloodthirsty like the other Asuras they'd encountered, and from their conversation, it sounded like they had no intention of helping the chiefs invade the human realm. On closer inspection, the 3 exorcists didn't have horns on their foreheads, and their skin wasn't scorched from fire. Were they a different race from the horned Asuras, or were they another species altogether? At this point, Stephen could only try asking, "If you don't plan on helping the tribes, what are you going to do when they show up on the summit and ask you to leave the mountain? They won't take no for an answer." "Weaklings aren't qualified to ask questions that are none of your business," Luan said. "You 3 should watch yourselves. If you get on the tribe's bad side, you won't have a good ending." Luan waved his hand, and thousands of snowflakes gathered around Stephen, Liam, and Ezra. They were dragged off the summit and tossed unceremoniously down the mountain. The 3 of them sat up, spluttering from the snow. Not only did they not gain anything from their encounter with the exorcists, their fight was painfully one-sided. They stared at each other, not knowing what to do next. They spotted a crowd of Asuras heading to the igloo at the summit. It was the Elder and his team. Maybe the fight just now had attracted their attention. "Do you think the exorcist will go back with them if the conditions are right?" Stephen asked the flood dragon. "I doubt it." The tribe's announcement had caused a storm in the realm. Even a beast like the flood dragon living in the depths of the mountains had heard about it. If the exorcist desired wealth and power, they wouldn't have waited until now. Luan, Drew, and Rio were less than pleased when another group of uninvited guests showed up at their doorstep. The Elder greeted them respectfully, even though he greatly surpassed them in age and seniority. "We are here to invite you to our village for a small favor. It won't take long. You may return home as soon as it's over." He didn't get into the specifics, but everyone knew what he meant. Luan, Drew, and Rio didn't want to get involved. Throughout the long river of history, the human realm has been invaded multiple times, but they always managed to survive in the end. This proved that their cultivators weren't as weak as they seemed. Luan rejected the Elder politely. "As exorcists, we would like to stay away from war. Ambition is never satisfied. After conquering the human realm, there will most likely be another realm that catches your eye. Conflict is endless, and we don't want any part in it." The Elder smiled awkwardly. That was exactly what the tribes were planning to do. The only way to expand their influence and obtain resources was to constantly wage war on other realms. To the 4 chiefs, this was a positive cycle. "We're not asking you to help for free. Name your conditions. Whether it's ore veins, towns, or villages, just say the word. We'll give them to you." Luan and his brothers were young by Asura standards, but they had lived a long life, and most of it was in isolation. They weren't interested in worldly possessions. The Elder was conflicted when Luan rejected him again. If he couldn't bring the exorcist back to the tribe, he would face severe consequences. He subtly reached out with his aura to get a sense of their foundation. But when his aura touched him, it was drawn into a bottomless whirlpool. The Elder was forced to stall for time. "I understand this is an important decision to make. I'll give you some time to think about it." Without waiting for a response, he led his team away from the summit and found a random area in the forest to set up camp. They couldn't leave without the exorcists. Drew and Rio started complaining once they were out of earshot. "If we don't agree to their request, our peaceful days are over. But if we help them with the silver netting, chaos will spread across the realms. It's a waste of time to think about these things. Why don't we just kill him? If the tribes send another team, we'll kill them too. Drew and Rio were younger and hot-tempered, but Luan was older and more experienced. Antagonizing the tribes wasn't a good idea. He stood by the window and peered into the depths of the forest. The humans are engaged in conflict with the tribes. We could use that to our advantage. Rio didn't think highly of humans. You think those three are strong enough to oppose that elder and his team? Even if they have the courage, they'll die for sure. Let's wait and see what happens, Luan said. They might just end up killing each other. When the sun set, the Asuras started a campfire and prepared to spend the night in the mountains. Some of them left to patrol the area. Stephen, Liam, and Ezra kept a watchful eye on them. With their enemy setting up camp this close to them, they couldn't let their guard down for even a minute. The only good news was that the exorcist had turned them away. We should deal with the Asuras tonight, Liam suggested. Maybe the exorcist will have a better impression of us if we help resolve their issue. Stephen didn't think it would be that easy. It was only a few hours ago that they tried to kill the exorcists. It would take a miracle to improve their relationship. They had nothing better to do for the rest of the night, so they decided to do as Liam suggested. The threadworms dug a tunnel underground, and the three of them followed. The mountain was large, and the Asuras on patrol didn't notice when the terrain beneath their feet changed. The ground opened, and they fell into a deep pit. Chains wrapped around their ankles and electrocuted them. The chains were one of the weapons Stephen had taken from Phantasma Isle's treasure vaults. It was more than enough to deal with the regular Asuras, and maybe even the elderly. He had to be exhausted after dealing with wild beasts and man-eating vegetation all day. The threadworms cleaned up the bodies by swallowing them whole. Residents of the Asura realm could increase their cultivation by devouring each other. The threadworms thanked Stephen for the delicious meal. Don't mention it. The night is long and we have a lot more Asuras to get through. Stephen buried the chains in the snow and waited for the other Asuras to step into the trap. In less than half an hour, more than 10 Asuras were killed. The combination of chains, electricity, and threadworms were seamless. The Asuras seemed to have evaporated into thin air. There were no traces of battle, nor was there the stench of blood. Most of the remaining Asuras didn't notice anything amiss, but the Elder was different. His senses were sharp. He had an uneasy feeling as he sat in front of the campfire, chewing on barbecued meat. Are the teams on patrol back yet? Not all of them, one of the Asuras replied. Do you think the exorcist will come after us tonight? No. I sensed something strange coming from the forest, not the summit. The Elder couldn't figure out who in the Asura realm would want to attack them. The Asuras were on the same side. Bringing the exorcist back to the village would benefit everyone. His suspicions fell on the beast on the mountain. The campfire and the meat must have lured them over. The Elder warned his team to keep their eyes peeled for aggressive beasts. As the hours passed, the Asura's dwindling numbers became more apparent. Where did the other teams on patrol go? The Elder asked. Stay near the campfire. Don't wander too far. We've lost contact with them, his subordinate said. We tried calling them back, but there was no response. They either ignored us or they're too far away to hear us. The Elder stood up and leaped into the air for a bird's-eye view of the mountains. He unleashed waves of energy onto the surrounding forest. The trees went up in flames, dispersing the darkness. There was no sign of the missing patrol teams anywhere. They were most likely dead. The culprit had killed them without leaving any evidence behind. Whoever it was couldn't be a regular cultivator. The Elder from the Blackhorn tribe took the strongest Asuras with him and followed the route the patrol teams took to conduct an investigation. His group followed quietly. Their morale was dropping fast. The rest of the Asuras stayed by the campfire. They weren't as strong as the Elder's group, but their senses were still sharp. The slightest change in the breeze and the direction the grass blew would alert them. Stephen, Liam, and Ezra couldn't kill them in one move, but that didn't mean it wasn't impossible. I heard a lethal venom runs through your veins, Stephen said to the flood dragon. Is that true? You're well informed. Are you planning to target the Asuras by the campfire? Yes, but their physical attributes are unusual. I'm not sure how high their resistance to poison is. I'm not a real dragon yet, but my venom will do the job. Stand back and watch. The flood dragon opened its mouth, and a black mist drifted towards the campfire. Even the grilled meat on the rack wasn't spared. The Asuras were none the wiser. Their meat seemed to have become more delicious, and they ate faster than before. They complained as they stuffed their faces. I thought this expedition was going to be easy. The exorcists are too stubborn for their own good. They isolate themselves from worldly affairs, so they're not moved by wealth or power. How strong are they, anyway? We should just head to the summit and tie them up. Then we'll bring them back by force. Don't be stupid. They're capable of erasing your spiritual energy in seconds. Your cultivation will disappear, and your hard work will all go to waste. If we fail the expedition, we'll have no value to the tribe. That's not any better. The Asuras were afraid of the consequences of returning to the tribe empty-handed, but most of them were more afraid of the exorcists. The last time they were sighted in the Asura realm was thousands of years ago. They were a mystery, and no one knew what they were really capable of. Where did the patrol teams go? Is someone or something on the mountain out to get us? Stop scaring us. Everyone in our team is from the 4 major tribes. Who would dare go against our chiefs? That means there's a beast on the mountain picking us off one by one. It isn't worth the risk to join the team. No one said anything after that. The Asuras had a big appetite. They ate all the meat on the rack. As the minutes passed, the fatigue from the venom settled in, and they fell asleep by the campfire. Once the poison enters their circulation, their internal organs will begin to fail, the flood dragon explained. Anyone affected by my venom usually dies within 10 minutes, but it'll probably take a bit longer for them since their abnormal physical strength. When the elder came back with his group, he would be furious to see his team dead. We're more than enough to handle the elder. Why don't we take care of him too? Liam asked. We're not that far from the summit, Stephen said. The exorcists don't like fighting and killing, so we'll have to let the elder live a little longer. The exorcist Stephen fought with was as powerful as the rumors. He'd neutralized every attack that contained inner energy with his bare hands before tossing them off the summit and ending the fight. It would have been wise for them to provoke him and his companions. An hour later, the elders' group returned from patrol. They were rendered speechless by the bodies around the campfire. The expedition team had almost been wiped out. They were the only ones left, but they still didn't know who the culprit was. Investigate their deaths and don't stray too far from the group, the elder ordered. Do you think the exorcists are behind this? One of the Asuras asked. Not just anyone can kill this many people in secret. There's no evidence, but tomorrow morning we'll have another talk with them. There were no clues even after they investigated the bodies by the campfire. The Asuras had been consuming the flesh of beasts for most of their lives, and they'd naturally built up resistance to all kinds of poisons. If they died by a lethal poison their bodies couldn't handle, that meant it wasn't an ordinary one. The elder suspected that the culprit wasn't a cultivator. A venomous snake was more likely. The mountain could be polluted by their venom. And to prevent any more accidental deaths, they had to restrain from hunting and eating for the rest of the night. The elder swept the mountain with his inner energy, but he didn't sense any cultivators or beasts in the area. Stephen's team had already left the forest. They were spending the night in a tunnel that the threadworms dug out. Dealing with corpses corroded by poison was a laborious task. The remaining Asuras dragged the bodies together and burned them. The poison dissipated into thin air as their bodies turned to ashes. The elder was seething with anger, but he didn't have an outlet. The culprit was like a ghost lingering around them. Before he knew it, the sun rose over the horizon, and he trekked to the summit to have another discussion with the exorcists. It was also a sleepless night for Luan, Drew, and Rio. They'd witnessed the humans slaughtering the Asuras. It was a shocking scene. The Myriad Mountains are full of danger, Luan said when the elder arrived. If you want to live, you should leave as soon as you can. A dark look crossed the elder's face. I can't leave until I achieve my goal. Do what you want, but don't say I didn't warn you. Just as Luan was about to turn around and close the door, the elder attacked. His horns shone, and bursts of energy enveloped the igloo. They penetrated the frozen earth and riddled the ground with holes. Luan circulated his speed to the limit in an instant. He passed through the gaps between the beams of a light in a blur and reappeared behind the elder. The elder infused his inner energy into his sword and swung at the igloo. The force behind his strike could shatter mountains. When he'd reached the end of his patience, he dropped all pretenses. If the exorcist didn't want to come with them, he would make them. Luan's expression darkened. You're bold. Even the 4 chiefs wouldn't be this reckless if they were here. I apologize, the elder said, not bothering to sound sincere. Our tribe will compensate you for the damages. Drew and Rio rushed out of the house and formed a barrier, blocking the elder's strike. The destruction and nullification attributes intertwined, enveloping the summit in a cascade of light. The elder was forced into a corner. There was no room for another attack. If he touched the light, his inner energy would be drained. There was nothing he could do without his energy. Stephen led his team to a cave near the summit and used the illusory pearls to observe their fight. The elder is fighting a losing battle. He doesn't have any special techniques to counter the exorcist's nullification. If we ask nicely, do you think they'll teach us? Liam asked. Even if they agree, we can't learn their techniques. Our foundations are the complete opposite of theirs. If we incorporate their techniques into our cultivation, you can say goodbye to your career as a martial artist. Liam was disappointed. What's our next step? Those exorcists are hell-bent on staying on the mountain. They won't be going with the elder. The tribes were gathering a crowd of their people and sealing their strength. There'd be another invasion soon. Stephen believed in Jace's leadership and his talent for strategy, but even that couldn't save them from the overwhelming strength in numbers. If they wanted to stop the invasion, they'd have to stir up internal conflict between the 4 major tribes. Stephen once again placed his hopes on the Flood Dragon. I've heard that the Asura realm has a long history of large-scale wars between the beasts and the Asuras. Is there a way to unify the beasts in such a short amount of time? The Flood Dragon had been cultivating for thousands of years. It had a deep understanding of the Asura realm's history. He'd witnessed the unification of several beast groups before. Unless the celestial beast descends once more, it's hard to say. The strongest beasts prefer to live alone in isolated areas and aren't interested in conflict. For example, the Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Tortoise. They established their own independent space as their sacred ground. What kind of existence is the celestial beast? Stephen asked. He wondered if the beasts worshipped an omnipotent existence similar to the Asura King. The celestial beast isn't a pure life form. He's an independent consciousness formed from the evil and murderous intent of wild and demonic beasts. When the negative energy in the universe accumulates to a certain extent, the celestial beast will be born. This has only happened 3 times in the past 1,000 of years. There's no way to predict when he'll awaken again. Stephen had never heard anything like it. The accumulation of an abstract concept evolving into an omnipotent entity with intelligence was beyond his comprehension. This was more profound than creating an artificial human like Ezra from liquefied inner energy. Did the celestial beast ever establish a faction to pass on his legacy? He prefers to be alone, but he does have followers, the Flood Dragon said. If you're curious, you can check out the cemetery. The composition of the celestial beast's body was unique. He didn't leave anything behind after his death. His followers renovated the place where he passed as a cemetery and built a mausoleum for worship. Stephen's curiosity was piqued. He activated the token and showed the Flood Dragon the holographic map. Meanwhile, the Elder's fight with Luan was coming to an end. His attacks had all been neutralized, and he was at his wit's end. If he couldn't defeat Luan, he wouldn't be able to bring the exorcists back to the tribe. Luan didn't kill him. If you understand the difference between us, then leave. The spatial rift didn't appear for the tribes to start a war. The Elder tried one last time to persuade him. It won't end well for us if you reject us. Our tribes are formidable. Before you go around threatening others, make sure your life is secured first, Luan retorted. Be careful on your way down. One slip-up and your life is forfeit. Stephen watched the Elder lead the remainder of his team away from the summit. The exorcists were skilled, and the tribes wouldn't be able to force them to destroy the silver netting that easily. It wasn't a permanent solution, but he had time to focus his attention on other issues. The Celestial Beast Cemetery was located 500 miles south of the Myriad Mountains. Whether his tomb had been preserved or not depended on how devoted his followers were. It had been thousands of years since his death, and tomb robbers were inevitable. The same thing had happened to Tristan's nether graveyard. Stephen hoped the exorcists could fend off the tribes while they were away. The chiefs wouldn't just sit back and watch as the spatial rift disappeared. They would resort to drastic measures to force the exorcists to help them destroy the silver netting. There was no time to waste. Stephen's team mounted the threadworms, and they shuttled along the rocky terrain at a fast pace. The ice dragon released its aura, dispersing the beast within a small radius. The journey was smooth, and it only took half a day for them to travel 500 miles. The threadworm's energy was surging from how many Asuras they'd consumed. They arrived at a massive swamp as boundless as the ocean. It was so large that they couldn't tell where it began and where it ended. There were unusual fish swimming in the swamp. "Did the mausoleum sink into the swamp?" Stephen asked. "I don't know," the flood dragon said. "I used the legends to speculate the location of the celestial beast cemetery. No one knows exactly where it is. The only way to find out is if you go down and explore yourself." Stephen turned back to the swamp. The fish swimming in the mud had sharp teeth and frenzied eyes. They reminded him of piranhas on Earth. He infused his chain with inner energy and tossed it into the center of the swamp. The end of the chain sank into the mud to search for traces of the cemetery. The fish were excited when they saw the strange chain in the water. They swam over and started biting the metal. "Do those fish bite everything they see? The chain is too hard for their teeth." "The beasts of our realm have unusual diets," the flood dragon explained. "They're probably used to chewing on hard substances like ores, but your metallic chain is too hard for them to bite through." When the flood dragon trained alone in the underground rivers, it relied on ores and crystals to fill its stomach. This was a diet that most of the beasts of the Asura realm had in common. Stephen's inner energy was covering the length of the weapon. When the fish continued to harass the chain, the unpleasant sensation of teeth grinding against metal transmitted back to him. He condensed a layer of the killin's flames onto the chain. The high temperature repelled the school of fish, and they swam away. With the fish gone, Stephen extended the chain into the depths. It reached the bottom within minutes. Waves of the killin's heat swept the water and destroyed the rocky layer. Bubbles rose to the surface as the water boiled. As the rocks and sand dispersed, a metal plate with strange patterns appeared at the depths. Stephen was about to lift the plate using the chain when a middle-aged man called out to him. "What are you doing? This is a forbidden area." Without warning, the man unsheathed his sword and unleashed a rush of energy towards Stephen, with every intention to kill him on the spot. Liam rushed in front of Stephen and used his blade to divert the attack into the swamp. The energy parted the water, and waves loomed over the surface. The man attacked again. This time, he condensed phantoms of beasts. Liam pointed his blade at the forest by the shore. He made gestures with his free hand, and a storm of leaves emerged from the trees. They were sharpened with his inner energy and more deadly than a regular weapon. The leaves blanketed the phantoms and crushed them. The man staggered from the backlash. He looked past Liam and glared at Stephen, who was pulling up the metal plate with his chain. He condensed a golden carp on the surface of the water. As it swam around the swamp, the water evaporated, turning the mud into compact soil. The weight pressed on the metal plate, preventing Stephen from pulling it out. The passage to the Celestial Beast Cemetery was likely right below the plate. The ice dragon materialized, and Stephen leaped onto its back. It flew over the swamp. He patted the ice dragon's scales, and it understood what he wanted. It opened its mouth, and one of the cannons that the Asuras produced appeared on its tongue. The ice dragon was capable of storing anything inside its stomach as long as there was room. Ezra and Liam knew how destructive the cannon was. They took off running into the forest and crouched to reduce the impact. The man wasn't as lucky. He was thrown into the air when the cannon fired and bombarded the swamp. The impact uprooted the trees and plants on the shore. The soil had hardened, but without the cover of the water, the swamp couldn't withstand a projectile from heavy artillery. The cannon continued to fire for a full minute. When the explosions died down and the smoke dispersed, the hardened soil was gone, and the metal plate was in full view. The man jumped to his feet and reached for his sword. The ice dragon dove for the ground and pressed the man into the dirt with its claws. "If you don't want to die, then settle down," Stephen said. The man scoffed. "My life is insignificant. If I die, thousands of beasts will avenge me." "You're stubborn. Are you a follower of the Celestial Beast?" The man was taken aback. The Celestial Beast had died thousands of years ago. He wasn't expecting someone to recognize him as his follower. "You're smarter than you look." "You're right, I am his follower. I'm in charge of guarding the underground mausoleum. All residents of the Asura realm know about the Celestial Beast's existence. He alone could take over the realm if he wanted to. I advise you not to do anything out of line." Stephen wasn't deterred. He exerted force, and the chain lifted the metal plate, exposing the entrance to a deep pit. Pitch-black air currents gushed out from the opening and gathered above the swamp. The evil aura it emitted sent a shiver down Stephen, Liam, and Ezra's spines. "We don't know what's down there," Ezra said. "I'll scout the area to make sure it's safe." Before Stephen could tell him it was too dangerous to go alone, the black mist entered the man trapped beneath the ice dragon's claws. Stephen had an ominous feeling. At his signal, the ice dragon released the man and flew into the air. Stephen threw out his chain to tie the man up, but he grabbed the ends and pulled. Stephen pulled back, and for a moment they were engaged in a tug-of-war. The ear-piercing sound of metal grating against metal filled the air. Stephen only lasted a few seconds before he was forced to give up the chain. The man had gotten stronger in the span of a few minutes. What was that black mist? Did it enhance his cultivation base? Stephen looked down at his hand. A gash ran along his palm. Blood dripped onto the ice dragon's scales. It wasn't easy to damage the body of a red dust immortal. It had been a while since he'd seen his own blood. The man's demeanor and temperament were different from what they had been moments before. His voice was youthful and magnetic. "After being in the darkness for so long, I finally have another chance to come out for a breather. This is the Celestial Beast Cemetery. Forcing open the gate is a grave sin." The man's aura surged, and glowing tattoos appeared on his skin. Looking closely, they were tattoos of beasts. Stephen materialized his sword and leaped to the ground. "Are you the Celestial Beast?" "You could say that, but I'm just a sliver of consciousness right now. Once I awaken, the Asura realm will submit to me." The ice dragon's urgent voice rang out in Stephen's mind. This was the Celestial Beast's first appearance since its death thousands of years ago. It wasn't an opponent they could handle. "Get on my back and grab your people. We're getting out of here." "This is our opportunity to suppress the tribes. We can't leave without trying to reason with him." "It's too dangerous. If he attacks, even I might not be able to stop him." The Celestial Beast didn't give them time to make a decision telepathically. He took one step forward, and then another. He crossed thousands of feet with every step until suddenly he was right in front of Stephen. "You're brave for a human. How about I give you a quick death? Not just anyone could have the opportunity to die by my hand. You should be honored." "Don't be in such a hurry. I'm here with a proposal. What do you think about suppressing the 4 major tribes and having the beast take over the Asura realm?" The Celestial Beast laughed, as if he'd just heard the world's funniest joke. Humans were weak. He could turn them into dust with one finger. "I do wonder if that's possible every time I come to the Asura realm, but you're not qualified to have such ambitions." He extended his finger and flicked twice in Stephen's direction. The air compressed and slammed into him. Before leaving for the Asura realm, Stephen had changed into a uniform he'd taken from Phantasma Isle's treasure vaults. It absorbed most of the impact, but he was still forced to take a few steps back. "If we work together, I can help you realize your ambition." "You're weaker than the wild beasts in this forest. I don't see what good would come of us working together." "Then let me show you what I'm capable of." Stephen manifested a phantom of the Killen. It was an ancient beast with an intimidating aura, but the Celestial Beast was the supreme ruler of every beast in the universe. He wasn't fazed in the slightest. The Killen opened its mouth and fired a torrent of energy at the Celestial Beast. It was so bright that Liam and Ezra had to close their eyes. It was like the sun had descended upon the swamp. Stephen remotely controlled the chains. They wrapped around the Celestial Beast and restrained his movements just as he was enveloped by the wave of energy. The ice dragon grabbed Stephen, Liam, and Ezra in its claws and flew to a height of over 30,000 feet. It condensed a shield of ice to protect them. The explosion triggered waves of heat. They slammed into the shield repeatedly. It was on the verge of collapse, and the flood dragon had no choice but to lend them a hand. "Mr. Adams is surprisingly strong. I've never heard of a human capable of this level of destruction." The ice dragon was filled with pride. "Our master looks tiny and fragile, but he's capable of much more than you and I could ever imagine." When the blinding light scattered, an unbelievable sight awaited them. The Celestial Beast was standing in the same spot. Not a single hair was out of place, nor were his clothes in tatters. The area around him had turned into a hellish scene of bubbling lava. "I suppose your skills are passable, but just barely. There's a big gap between you and the Asuras. If If your companions are like you, then maybe we could try cooperating. My followers call me Killian. You may do the same." Stephen wiped the sweat from his forehead, relieved that the celestial beast hadn't seen through his tricks. Fooling a god was blasphemous. The celestial beast wasn't aware of it, but he had a weakness. His awakenings were separated by thousands of years. He didn't have knowledge of the Asura realm's technological advancements. If Stephen hadn't secretly slipped an artillery shell into the Killian's mouth to amplify its output, he wouldn't have been capable of pulling off this level of destruction. The ice dragon returned to the ground, and Stephen cautiously approached Killian. The 4 tribes have been ruling the Asura realm for a long time. They've accumulated an endless supply of wealth. They've built warehouses in their territories and stored ores and crystals inside. I've heard that residents of this realm, including the beasts, consume ores as food. Killian nodded. His mouth was watering at the thought of energy-rich resources. He was hungry every time he awakened. "Where are these warehouses?" Stephen took out the token and showed him the holographic map. The land had changed drastically since the last time Killian awakened. He memorized the terrain and chose the closest warehouse in the Redhorn tribe's territory. "If I'm not satisfied with the warehouse, our deal is off." "I guarantee it'll meet your expectations," Stephen said, sounding more confident than he felt. He could only hope Killian didn't fly into a rage if he wasn't satisfied. Killian held out his hand, beckoning to something at the center of the swamp. A beast that resembled a massive shark emerged from the cracks. This was his mount. Stephen leaped onto the ice dragon's back, and they set off for the Redhorn tribe's territory. They occasionally passed by flying beasts, but for the most part, they were alone in the sky. In the Asura realm, the pressure rose to elevation increase. This was the opposite of the human realm. Liam leaned over and whispered to Stephen, "How long are we going to go along with him?" "We'll see. I don't know what's happening on the other side of the black hole. We can't waste all our time on him. We'll do as he says for now and leave once he's motivated to get rid of the 4 tribes." The terrain below was dyed crimson. The beasts on the ground sensed the terrifying auras in the sky and scampered out of sight. After some time in the air, the Redhorn tribe's territory finally came into view. "We have to descend here to avoid alerting them," Stephen said. Killian was impatient. "Why do we need to go through so much trouble to avoid them? We can just kill them." "There are weapons stored in the warehouse. It'll be easier to sneak in rather than walk through the front door." The ice dragon and Killian's mount landed on the outskirts. Everyone hid their auras to make way to the warehouse. The chief of the Redhorn tribe, Spence, had led the strongest members of his tribe to a village to monitor the black hole. The remaining Asuras were mediocre at best. When a team on patrol approached them, Killian released his black mist. Their spiritual energy couldn't resist the mist's corrosive effects. They lost consciousness, and Killian occupied their bodies as a cover. The threadworms dug a tunnel, and Stephen's team followed from underground. The security at the warehouse wasn't that tight. It seemed the Redhorn tribe hadn't learned anything after the Blackhorn tribe's warehouse was ransacked. They probably didn't think there'd be anyone daring enough to openly trespass on their territory. "Weren't you supposed to patrol the outskirts?" the guard at the entrance asked suspiciously. "Did you finish already?" Killian replied in the captain's body. "We've completed the rounds. What could possibly happen? No one would cause trouble on our territory." "You can never be too cautious. The chief isn't around. We need to make sure nothing else happens before he comes back." The 4 tribes are working together. Everyone in the realm knows that. Don't worry too much. After a short conversation, Killian managed to convince the guards to leave and let his team take over. When they left, he opened the door to the warehouse. The threadworms slithered out of the garden. With the cover of the trees and flowers, no one had noticed them. Stephen, Liam, and Ezra had followed Killian into the warehouse. They had seen these items before. The Blackhorn tribe's warehouse was similar, so they weren't surprised. But Killian had a different reaction. Those damned Asuras are stealing resources from the other species. When I awaken in my real body, I'll annihilate them from existence. He walked over to a pile of ores and crystals. They hovered above the floor and disappeared inside his body. Stephen had never seen this kind of absorption technique before. Killian didn't even need to open his mouth. The resources phased through the exterior of his body and were drawn inside. It didn't take long for Killian to consume all of the ores and crystals. He moved on to the containers. He twisted open the lid, and the pungent scent of fuel filled the warehouse. The liquid flowed out of the container and entered his body. The other 3 major tribes have warehouses like this, right? Let's go empty them when we're done here. You don't want to take over this tribe first? Stephen asked. I need to absorb enough energy and transfer it to my main body to fully awaken. That sounded time-consuming, and Stephen hoped it wouldn't take too long. Killian emptied the warehouse and descended the staircase to the basement. It was full of weapons and ammunition. He'd never seen them before. He was used to swords on the battlefield, and he didn't know anything about firearms and equipment. What are these metal pipes for? They look well made. They're weapons that can cause explosions, Stephen explained. I see. I'll leave them for you then. The ice dragon had emptied its stomach of the treasures from Phantasma Isle's vault before coming to the Asura realm. It had space for the cannons and ammunition. When the entire warehouse was cleared out, they left and headed to the other warehouses in the Redhorn tribe's territory. The plundering was fast and efficient. The tribe didn't notice their losses until much later. 18 warehouses had been ransacked in the span of one night. The terrible news reached the village the next morning. Spence couldn't believe his ears. He took his anger out on the guards who'd come to report. Tartador heard the commotion and came over to gloat. Their tribes were competitors. The Blackhorn tribe had lost a warehouse, but the Redhorn tribe had lost 18. That was the equivalent to losing multiple towns. If Spence was in his territory, he would have killed the guards on the spot. But in front of outsiders, he had to maintain his composure. I told you that someone was behind this. They're trying to sow discord. Either way, we've prepared an army of over 100,000 for the invasion. One thief doesn't change anything. You're taking it quite well, Tartador said. The expedition team should be on their way back. His estimate was on the mark. The Elder and the remainder of his team had just arrived in the village. The village had turned into a fortress from the sheer number of troops preparing to invade. The 4 chiefs welcomed the expedition team with a smile. Under everyone's expectant gazes, the Elder shamefully announced their failure. To save his life, he couldn't be too truthful. He came up with an excuse to cover up the deaths in the mountains. The exorcists are proud and arrogant. They refused to cooperate with us. I tried to force them, but their techniques overpowered mine. The 4 chiefs were astonished. An astronomical amount of energy was needed to maintain the black hole, but that wouldn't stop it from disappearing forever. And it could close any day now. Those exorcists are too short-sighted. We're all residents of the Asura realm. Destroying the silver netting is for the greater good. Why can't they see that? Let's send out our troops. If we combine our forces, we'll have millions of people on our side. We'll raise the Myriad Mountains to the ground. Did you forget about the black hole? It's about to close. By the time we come back, it might have disappeared already. But without the exorcists, there's nothing we can do. We have to make it clear that we're willing to give them anything they want as long as they do us this favor. The Elder listened to the chief's chatter. To avoid taking the blame, he informed the chiefs about the exorcist technique in great detail. Tartador nodded in understanding. My tribe's people have done their best. We need to go all out and force the exorcist to help us. Don't hold anything back. Kagan and Drake announced that they would take out their prized treasures of their respective tribes. They were amplification devices. The Elder had found the exorcist and observed their techniques. This was considered a sufficient contribution from the Blackhorn tribe. That left the Redhorn tribe. Everyone's gazes fell on Spence. For a second, he didn't know what to say. 18 warehouses on his territory had been robbed, and his tribe had suffered heavy losses. He couldn't publicize his prized treasures. What if the thief came back? To tell you the truth, there are thieves going around ransacking our warehouses, Spence said. We haven't confirmed their identities, but we suspect they're from the human realm. The chiefs didn't believe him. Millions of Asuras were stationed below the black hole. Even a fly would be discovered if it crossed the rift. Are you suffering from delusions? Kagan said. How could a weak species like humans cross over to our realm? Ascenders used to appear occasionally in the human realm, Spence argued. How do you know for sure this isn't their doing? Kagan dismissed him. "Stop wasting time. If you don't want to reveal your treasures, then forget it. Just lend us some of your people." Kagan and Spence led a team of the strongest members from the Goldhorn and Redhorn tribes and embarked on their journey to the Myriad Mountains. After a night of plundering, Stephen's team and Killian reached the Silverhorn tribe's territory. As if in line with their name, their tribe had constructed buildings using silver materials. Every construct on their territory glinted in the sunlight. Killian had grown tired of controlling the Asuras using his mist. He let the threadworms drill a direct tunnel into the warehouse. His stomach was like a bottomless pit. He emptied every warehouse they came across. Stephen didn't sense an improvement in Killian's cultivation base. Maybe the energy was transferred directly to his main body. Stephen used the illusory pearls to monitor the territory. "The chiefs haven't returned from the village. We've emptied so many of their warehouses, but they don't care. Their priority is keeping the black hole open." They had to move faster and stir up internal conflict within the tribes to prevent them from sending their people into the human realm. "Wealth and resources are worldly possessions," Killian said. "If you want to deal them a heavy blow, you'll find the solution at the center of your tribes." "You mean the Red Lake? What's there?" "According to ancient legends, that lake is the manifestation of the Asura king's blood. It's the origin of the Asuras. The blood is how they came to be. It's their holy land." Stephen remembered the strange transformation the martial artist had when they came in contact with Tardador's blood. The lake was conspicuous and easy to find. Blood was the essence of the Asuras. If they altered the lake, maybe the Asuras would be affected. "We'll go to the lake tonight. The ores and crystals aren't enough. I need to absorb more energy." "Isn't it a bit risky to consume the unknown?" Stephen asked. "You don't know how the water will affect your body." Killian flashed a confident smile. He could absorb anything that contained energy. He was a physical manifestation of the evil and murderous intent of beasts. His body didn't have blood, muscles, or bones. Any amount of energy would be consumed all the same. After they ransacked the Silverhorn tribe's warehouse, they headed to the lake. It would take some time before the theft was discovered, so they weren't at risk of being found. They traveled through the forest and deserts. The region around the lake was a restricted area. There was no one around. The stench of blood thickened, and fear welled up inside the threadworms, flood dragon, and even the ice dragon. This was an aura that belonged to the Asura king. Dread and terror came naturally from the pressure of a superior being. They subconsciously shuffled closer to Stephen as they made their way to the lake. "It's okay, you don't have to come with me," he said, stroking the ice dragon's wing. He turned to the rest of the beasts. "All of you should stay here. There's no one at the lake, so there won't be any fighting going on. We'll be back soon." The ice dragon was reluctant to leave him alone. "Be careful. The power of a god is all-pervasive and impossible to defend against. If something happens, retreat immediately." Stephen gestured to Liam and Ezra. "It'll be fine. Did you forget about my powerful companions?" The threadworms and the dragon weren't convinced. Only a god could go up against another god. Stephen's team made it to the lake as night fell. It was covered in a blanket of red fog evaporating from the water. When they approached, blotches of red appeared on Stephen and Liam's skin. They scrubbed at the stains, but it didn't come off. Stephen and Liam hurried out of the fog and maintained a safe distance from the lake. They circulated their inner energy to resist the fog's effects as much as possible. Much to their relief, their skin returned to normal in an hour. Ezra was artificial. He wasn't affected by the fog. "I'll check out the lake. I'll stay by the edge and see if there's anything strange about the water." "Okay, turn back if anything happens," Stephen said. It went without saying that Killian was also not affected. He and Ezra resumed their journey. Stephen left his illusory pearls next to them to observe their surroundings. The lake wasn't as big as the swamp, but it was more unsettling. The blood-red water surged in a vortex as if about to give birth to another life form. Looking in from the surface, there was nothing beneath the water. Ezra cautiously stood by the shore and dipped his sword into the lake. When the water touched the blade, its shiny metallic luster turned red with rust. Killian was intrigued. "I've never seen a lake like this." He bent down and reached out to touch the water. Wait, we don't know enough about this water, Ezra warned. It's not safe to touch it casually. Killian ignored him. He'd come this far to absorb the Asura King's energy. Taking a risk or two would be worth it. Just as his fingers were about to touch the water, a skeleton emerged from the waves. It attacked without warning. The skeleton's bones were stronger than regular weapons. If they were as brittle as normal bones, it would have withered away a long time ago from the corrosive water. The skeleton used to be a cultivator back when it was alive. After death, it stayed in the lake as a guard. Killian was forced back by the skeleton's sheer physical strength. No one saw this coming. Stephen hadn't been able to force Killian into taking one step back during their fight, but this skeleton had easily accomplished what he couldn't do. Killian put some distance between them. He sized up the skeleton. "Who are you?" The skeleton's laughter echoed. "Beasts like you are all brawn but no brains. I'm Davos. Does my name ring a bell? Back then, we fought for 10 days straight. You and I should have been able to recognize each other, even if we returned to ashes." There used to be a small group of exceptionally skilled cultivators among the Asuras. Davos was one of them. It was precisely because of their existence that the beasts weren't able to annihilate the Asuras in the past war. Killian was in disbelief. "Why did you abandon your body and become a skeleton?" "I'm pursuing the ultimate cultivation," Davos said. "Soaking in the lake could be considered the harshest training method to exist. The water vaporized my flesh and blood, leaving only my bones behind. They've been tempered over time." Killian was in a hurry to awaken in his main body. He'd absorbed a considerable amount of energy, and if Davos had been able to force him back, that could only mean his bones were indestructible. He couldn't waste any more time here. He had to get rid of Davos and absorb the lake's energy. Killian condensed a phantom of a python. It ruthlessly coiled around Davos and squeezed. A phantom of a bull appeared and rammed its horns into its skeletal body. As the god of every beast in the universe, Killian was superior in battle of pure strength. It wasn't easy for Davos to break free from the python's bindings. The bull rammed into him mercilessly. He changed tactics. His bones shifted and shot out in every direction, tearing the python to shreds. He grabbed the bull by its horns and slammed it to the ground. The phantom burst, releasing waves of energy that swept the fog aside. Stephen and Liam were watching the battle through the gem's holographic display. "Their fight is kind of primitive," Liam commented. "I was expecting profound techniques we don't see every day in the human realm." "This is the pinnacle of martial arts. The simplest and most basic moves are the most deadly." Liam nodded in understanding. "Killian is at a disadvantage. He's fighting alone. His opponent is using the lake to amplify his own energy." Stephen had noticed the same thing. He hoped the ores and crystals Killian had consumed would put him ahead. Davos destroyed the phantoms and closed the distance in a split second. A flurry of kicks and punches landed on Killian. The sharpened bones left gashes on his skin. Black mist seeped out from his wounds. He held out his hands towards the lake. A gust of wind swept the surface and spiraled into a tornado, drawing the water into its torrential winds. The clouds in the sky transformed into beasts and absorbed the water into themselves. "You're absorbing energy in the middle of a fight?" Davos mocked. "Looks like this is your last resort." "When I awaken in my main body, I'll turn you to dust in minutes," Killian retorted. "You're too confident in the beasts of this realm. Haven't you ever wondered what would happen if the beasts were eradicated? Your next reincarnation could be your last." Davos wasn't making empty threats. The Asuras were slowly picking off the beasts in their realm one by one. Soon they'd invade the human realm, eliminate every life form in their realm, and then move on to another world to repeat the same process. In the end, most of the beasts would go extinct, leaving the Asuras as the superior species. If the celestial beast lost this fight, Davos' threats would likely become reality. Stephen couldn't let his newfound ally be killed. "Liam, do your totems have other abilities? Can they form a shield around me to repel the fog?" Liam condensed his black wooden totems. They swirled around Stephen and formed a protective barrier of light. It was dim, but he could feel the isolated space. "I don't know how long it'll last," Liam said. "Keep an eye on the color of the wood." Stephen nodded and manifested the Killen's phantom. He rushed into the dense fog in a burst of flames. He heard the intense sounds of fighting from the shore before he reached the lake. Killian and Davos were locked in a fierce battle. Stephen's cultivation had reached the level where he could communicate with the Killim in the same way he'd done with the ice dragon's spiritual world. How can we get rid of that skeleton? Killian is barely holding his ground. There won't be anything I can do even if I join the fight. The skeleton's power comes from the lake. You can try evaporating the water. Will that really work? At the very least, it'll reduce the density of energy. Stephen didn't know how that would turn out, but he could only try. The uninvited guest above the lake attracted Davos's attention. He glared at Stephen in disgust. This is a sacred place. A cultivator from the human realm doesn't belong here. You talk big, but who knows how long the Asuras will be in power. You're joining forces with the celestial beast. You two aren't enough to pose a threat. We'll see about that. The Killim bombarded the lake with balls of fire. Red steam evaporated. The waters parted and waves crashed against the shore. Killian seized the opportunity to leap into the air as blood-red water droplets condensed around the lake. A change in the air caught Stephen's attention. He swirled around and blocked the incoming projectiles. The collision knocked him several feet back. Davos wasn't expecting Stephen to block his sharpened bones. This lake is a space the Asura King created. Your blasphemy towards our god is a sin worthy of death. None of you will be leaving this place alive. Worshipping a powerful god doesn't give you the right to impose on other beings, Stephen threatened fearlessly. The water level had dropped significantly. He didn't know how much of an effect it had on Davos, but one thing was for sure, he was less than pleased. The Killen released a wave of scorching fire. Davos created a blade from his bones and dissipated the flames. A rain of fire fell over the lake. He maintained his momentum and swung his blade at Stephen. Stephen condensed a barrier using the sword's aura. It almost shattered when they clashed. The raining fire set Davos ablaze, giving him a demonic appearance. His bones can't be destroyed, the Killen whispered. His energy comes from the lake. It's endless. If we keep fighting like this, the tribes will notice. What should we do? Give up on the lake and go back? Stephen asked. I would tell you to ask the celestial beast for his opinion, but he doesn't look so good after consuming the energy from the lake. In the heat of the battle, Stephen had lost track of Killian. He scanned the air, but he didn't see him anywhere. His gaze shifted to the ground. Killian was on his knees on the shore. He was hunched over, clutching his chest and gasping for air. His body shook violently. What's happening to him? The essence of a god is too much for him, the Killen said. He needs time to absorb it properly. We should leave the area for now. When Killian absorbed energy, he had to convert it into a non-elemental state before transferring it to his main body. The Asura King created this lake. The energy in the water belonged to a god, and it wasn't easy to break it down. The Killen distracted Davos as Stephen dove for the ground. He hauled Killian over his shoulder and motioned for Ezra, who was hiding nearby, to follow him. Under the cover of the sky of flames, they disappeared into the depths of the forest. Davos didn't chase them. His duty was to guard the lake, and he was concerned that there might be another enemy lurking nearby. The red fog began to spread from the lake. Stephen and Ezra changed course and ran in a different direction. By the time they escaped the fog's range, they found themselves in a vast desert. The barrier of light shattered, and Liam's totems faded. Liam met up with them shortly afterwards, and the threadworms and the dragons. What's happening? Is the skeleton still alive? He is. His body is indestructible. We couldn't damage him. Killian consumed the energy from the lake, but he's having a hard time absorbing it. Stephen didn't know much about the Asura realm's history, but from Killian's conversation with Davos, he could tell that they were old rivals. If they were evenly matched back then Davos was likely one of the strongest Asuras of his time. Killian hadn't said a word. He was lying on his side with his arms wrapped around himself, barely containing his convulsions. His eyes were glazed and unfocused as he tried to digest and absorb the energy. In the vast expanse of the universe and its laws, even a god was insignificant and painfully human. Stephen, Liam, and Ezra reached out with their auras, but they didn't sense the presence of Asuras. The desert was located somewhere outside the tribe's territories. Stephen glanced at Killian. He was too far gone in his agony to be aware of his surroundings. His body was defenseless. I don't know how long it'll take him to absorb the energy. I'm worried about what's happening on the other side of the rift. Stay here with Ezra and keep an eye on him. Okay, don't worry about us, Liam said. We'll wait here. Stephen trekked up the hill nearby and opened a spatial rift with the blade. He went in, and the familiar greenery of the human realm greeted him on the other side. The sky was blue, the forests were green, and the birds were chirping in the distance. There were no signs of war, which meant that the recent invasion by the Asuras had failed. Stephen returned to the northwestern border as fast as he could. When he appeared at the command center, everyone in the room perked up like they'd suddenly found their backbone. Jace stood up from his seat at the head of the table and offered it to Stephen. "Welcome back, Mr. Adams. While you were away, we used firearms to suppress the invaders. After they were weakened, our martial artists finished them off at close range." Stephen inspected the map on the table. It was the same as before. The terrain hadn't suffered any large-scale damage, and there were currently no enemy forces marked. Jace had done a good job of keeping the situation under control while he was in the Asura realm. Stephen let himself relax slightly, but when he looked up, he realized that the spacious room was somewhat deserted. Aside from him and Jace, the rest of the seats were occupied by the Leviathan unit's intelligence members. What happened to the representatives from the other countries? Didn't they send a commander with their reinforcements? After the broadcast of our new weapon was aired, the other countries sent reinforcements to assist in backline projects, Jace explained. They left most of the fighting to us. This is a dangerous place, and none of the countries were willing to send their higher-ups. Stephen was speechless. The officials from countries around the world were a group of timid people who valued their lives as much as gold. If they didn't send their higher-ups, the reinforcements were probably not that useful. At most, they were cheerleaders who stood on the sidelines and waved their flags as moral support. Jace continued. The elders and internal members from Tempest Citadel were one of the main reasons we were able to force the invaders with no casualties. Their space-time martial arts aren't offensive techniques, but they affect cognition. They helped us gain the upper hand. Stephen had forgotten that there was another outsider group stationed at the northwestern border that wasn't friend or foe. He hadn't expected much from them, but they were useful as temporary allies. The group from Tempest Citadel was staying at the inconspicuous hotel in the city, observing the situation from a distance. They didn't take orders from the military and took actions when they felt like their assistance was needed. Based on your observations, how high are their cultivations? The elders are at the beginning stages of the Red Dust Immortal realm, Jace replied. If they fought Tristan and Zane, they would have slightly more than 50% chance of winning. As expected from a faction that killed Descenders. They were stronger than the 4 ancient martial arts factions. After Jace finished his report, Stephen left the command center and went to the VIP suite to check on Tristan and Zane. They had detached themselves from the crisis and had no interest in getting involved. Tristan was lounging on the couch. You made it back alive, but it doesn't look like you accomplished anything. The Asuras are still sending their people into our realm. Stephen frowned. Tristan's sarcastic remarks were getting on his nerves. He was hiding in the hotel and doing nothing to help. He had no right to criticize him. Did you forget you've discarded your old body? When the Asuras invade, our world will come to an end, including you. Why are you getting worked up? We're not the only ancient martial artists around. Our new allies are stronger than us. Stephen wasn't following. The Leviathan unit and Hellcrown Palace's intelligence networks were extensive. If there were ancient martial artists stronger than Tristan and Zane, he would have heard about them by now. He turned to Zane for an explanation, but all he got was a tired sigh. When Tristan unfurled a couple of familiar scrolls, Stephen knew right away that he'd been committing thefts behind his back. Why do you have the portraits of the Ascenders from Phantasma Isle's treasure vault? Don't tell me you infiltrated the island at the bottom of the sea. Obviously. How else do you think I got my hands on these? The scrolls glowed, and the portraits came to life. 5 Ascenders appeared. The man in the lead, Emil, was the same Ascender who'd fought Tristan on the island. He looked around and frowned. The scrolls were a memento of the Ascenders living on the island. They should have been buried beneath the sea. What were they doing in this strange form? He fixed Tristan a deadly glare. Did you forget about the thrashing I gave you on the island? Should I teach you another lesson? Stephen stepped between them before another fight could break out and explained the situation. If the Asuras invaded, the world, including Phantasma Isle, would fall into their hands. The Ascenders didn't blindly take his word for it. They told him to take them to the black hole. Stephen led them outside. The Ascenders rushed into the air and began to study the black hole closely. They'd seen spatial rifts before, so they knew what it was. What's there to worry about? Even Ascenders like us will trigger the laws of the heavens if we cross between dimensions. With the silver netting in place, the Asuras won't be able to invade. From his tone, I thought something serious was happening. The martial artists of this era are too weak. They were panicking about a spatial rift. Stephen joined them in the air. There are exorcists in the Asura realm. They have the ability to remove the silver netting. The Ascenders had never heard of cultivators with heaven-defying techniques. They didn't believe in the existence of exorcists. While they were arguing about the credibility of Stephen's claims, the black hole underwent another change. The space fluctuated, and a group of Asuras stepped out. A glowing pattern was engraved on their chest and arms. The stronger they were, the more they'd have to suppress their cultivation. The size of their seals spoke volumes to their true strength. The Asuras attacked as soon as they crossed the rift. Their objective was to kill. There was no need to exchange greetings. When their punches and kicks reached the Ascenders, they made no move to dodge. The impact dispersed the clouds, but they were as immovable as a mountain. The Asuras were astonished. They'd heard that the cultivators from the human realm were so weak that one move would be enough to blow them away. The captain of the Asuras couldn't sense the foundation of their cultivation. He launched an attack by himself to test them out. Emil casually extended a finger and deflected the captain's fist. How are you going to take over the human realm when you're this weak? The captain's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Who are you? Your aura is different from the human cultivators on the ground. That's none of your business, Emil said flippantly. The captain wouldn't be going down without a fight. He drew his weapon, and the Asura behind him circulated their energy, preparing for a life-and-death battle. Stephen was impressed. If the Ascenders from Phantasma Isle were on their side, it would be much easier to resolve the crisis. Didn't you come up with a plan before bringing their scrolls to the surface? He whispered to Tristan. They're not going to help us without a good reason. You can't expect me to think of everything like you. The battle in the air ended after a few short rounds. The Asuras were fast, but their speed had no effect on Emil. He flicked his finger. The air compressed and shot towards the Asuras, riddling them with holes. He grabbed one of their swords and finished them off. To the Ascenders, killing an Asura was that simple. The invasion had been resolved, but no one knew when the next one would be. The Ascenders returned to the ground. There were no traces of battle. Not even the Asura's bodies had been preserved. All of them had turned to dust. Emil turned to Stephen. They're weaklings from another realm. You needed us to deal with them. The martial artists of this world are getting weaker with every generation. Not all of our spiritual energy is contained in the scrolls, but it should be enough to handle the Asuras. Thank you for your assistance. If there's anything you need, let me know. Don't try to flatter us. What could you possibly have that we want? The Ascenders looked young, but they were from thousands of years ago. They were more scheming than anyone here. The two elders from Tempest Citadel had watched the fight from their hotel. They were surprised that Stephen had found a stronger ally than them in such a short amount of time. Do we need to keep staying here? As long as the silver netting is intact, there's a limit to how strong the invaders will be. The Sovereign's new allies can take care of them. What about these two martial artists who are hanging around our territory on the island? They seem to be close friends with the Sovereign. There are hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the city. If we kill them, we won't be able to leave here alive. We have no choice but to leave them alone for now. Just as the elders were about to return to the hotel to wake their team and head home, a golden light enveloped them. They didn't have time to struggle or say anything because they were trapped inside. When the light dispersed, they were face to face with the Ascenders on the outskirts of the city. Emil scrutinized them. The fluctuations in your spiritual energy are a dead giveaway. Are you affiliated with Tempest Citadel? We are, the elder admitted. Who are you? Our identities aren't important. Just know that we have many unresolved grudges between us. The atmosphere turned tense in a heartbeat. Stephen watched the situation unfold from the sidelines with Tristan and Zane. He wouldn't be surprised if Tempest Citadel was enemies with every Ascender from the past. Our faction aims to maintain the human realm seal, the elder said. When a martial artist reaches a certain level in their cultivation and ascends, they damage the spatial barrier. That could be one of the reasons why the black hole above us appeared in the first place. The Ascenders from Phantasma Isle remembered their encounter with Tempest Citadel thousands of years ago. They were ambushed at the moment of their ascension. Although they survived, they hadn't forgotten about the incident. The goal of cultivation is to reach enlightenment. Crossing the spiritual barrier is inevitable. You claim it damages the seal, but where's your proof? So many innocent lives were lost because of your baseless theory. The elders stood their ground. So what? The ends justify the means. Emil was outraged. Many of his friends had fallen victim to Tempest Citadel. Thousands of years had passed, but the memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday. Emil spread his hands, and a huge pressure bore down on the elders. Even Stephen, Tristan, and Zane felt its effects. The flow of their inner energy was disrupted. One of the elders unsheathed his two swords and drew a circle in the air with the blades. Two opposing waves of energy spiraled towards Emil. The changes in pressure had no effect on his space-time technique. Emil gestured to the forest not too far away. An ancient tree was uprooted and compressed when he clenched his hand into a fist. The tree shifted into the shape of a sword. The wood turned black like charcoal and then turned clear like crystal diamonds. Cultivating inner energy was imperative to a martial artist, but it was just as important to utilize it in profound ways. At first glance, Stephen didn't know how Emil had created a crystal sword from an ancient tree, but then he figured it out. Emil had used his inner energy to raise the temperature and burn the tree. This process removed its impurities. Then he'd compressed and adjusted the sequence of atoms to turn it into clear diamond. They have a deep understanding of the laws of nature. Creation is much harder than destruction, but they do it so easily. If you train hard enough, you'll be able to do the same thing in the future, Zane said. Putting that aside, this is an interesting development. Those Ascenders hold a grudge against Tempest Citadel. From what Stephen had heard, Tempest Citadel used underhanded means to kill Ascenders and steal their cultivation. Their techniques have been passed down for thousands of years. No one knew how profound they were. Are you sure the Ascenders can't win? You've seen what Tempest Citadel is capable of. Zane had confidence in the Ascenders' ability. They will. Even if the Elders are stronger, the Ascenders are more experienced and have a profound understanding of the laws of this world. Emil's crystal sword was fast. He forced the Elder back, leaving small cuts on his skin. Whenever the Elder made a move, the sword would interrupt him and change the trajectory of his technique. He was having a hard time disrupting the fluctuations in space. Emil was relentless in his attacks because he'd seen through the Elder's weakness. There's nothing you can do if you can't cast your technique. He reached his speed and struck up to 100 times per second with his sword. The Elder didn't reply. He was too focused on dodging. More cuts appeared on his skin, and his blood stained the ground with every step. Emil had no plans to kill the Elder. He wanted to make him suffer to avenge his fallen companions. Emil's moves were simplistic, but every strike packed a surprising amount of force. The Elder had sustained tiny cuts on his meridians and internal organs in addition to his external wounds. He was constantly circulating his inner energy. If he wasn't careful and exceeded his limits, his organs would begin to fail. Left with no other choice, the Elder shattered his swords. The metal fragments reflected the sunlight like mirrors, creating thousands of reflections of the two Elders. Every reflection was lifelike, and their auras were the same. Emil scattered hundreds of reflections with one strike, but the two Elders managed to escape in the end. The Elders had transmitted a verbal message to their team at the hotel, instructing them to leave as soon as they could. They fled in every direction. Two of the Ascenders, Mina and Faye, went over to Emil. It's a bad habit to drag out the battle when you can kill them in an instant, Mina chided. Emil shrugged. We have plenty of time to find Tempest Citadel and exterminate them. You need to learn how to prioritize, Faye said. The black hole is right above us. Who knows when the Asors will invade again? If the human realm falls, our home will be destroyed. The Ascenders were just like Zane. They held deep-seated grudges against Tempest Citadel. Luckily, Emil's companions were trying to convince him to postpone his rampage. To divert their attention, Stephen bit the bullet and interjected. He invited them to the city. When everyone was settled in the luxury hotel, the Ascenders introduced themselves as Emil, Mina, Faye, Skylar, and Vlad. They didn't say much about their martial arts faction. Stephen got down to business as soon as the pleasantries were out of the way. Are you interested in overthrowing the Asoras? Their goal is to conquer other realms. If we get rid of them, we won't have to worry about another invasion from their realm. What are you talking about? Emil asked. Your followers are just here to make up the numbers. We don't have enough people to wipe them out. I found the Celestial Beast. He's on our side, and he's about to awaken. Under his lead, the other beasts in the Asura realm will unify and fight against the Asuras. The Ascenders had heard about the Celestial Beast before. He wasn't a creature of flesh and blood. He was a unique existence born from the evil of beasts. Mina was skeptical. Why would the Celestial Beast help someone as weak as you? How do you know he's really your ally? What if he kicks you to the curb after using you? Gods are entities beyond your understanding. Stephen obviously couldn't read Killian's mind. The only thing he could do was cooperate with him. The wisdom and complex thinking of humans were superior to beasts, including those with intelligence. If Killian wanted to take over the Asura realm, it'd be in his best interest to have a human by his side and use him as a strategist. I can't say for certain he won't toss me aside, but for the time being, we both need each other. Emil was the first to agree. In the past, he'd heard stories about the famous Asura commander, Davos. If he helped the celestial beast, he might have an opportunity to fight him. The rest of the Ascenders had their doubts, but they went along with Emil's decision. Stephen left the rest to Jace and went back to his room. The flow of time between the human and Asura realms were different. He hadn't been gone for long, so Killian shouldn't have noticed his disappearance. Stephen opened a rift with his blade and stepped inside. He used the holographic map and the token to find his way back to the desert. Killian was leaning against a tree and sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. He was in a meditative state and showed no signs of waking up. Liam and Ezra were patrolling the area and keeping an eye out for enemies. Absorbing the Asura King's energy was a risky gamble. It contained a strong consciousness, and if Killian wasn't careful, it would take over his body and extinguish his own consciousness. Although he'd absorbed a large amount of energy from the ores and crystals, he hadn't fully awakened. The energy from the lake could be too much for him. Stephen called out to Liam and Ezra in a low voice to avoid breaking Killian's concentration. Is he not done yet? We're about to open in the desert. Things will get complicated if the Asuras find us. While Liam was waiting, he constantly reached out with his aura to assess Killian's condition. His spiritual energy was chaotic, and his mind was on the verge of breaking. Stephen had just bragged about having the celestial beast on his side to convince the Ascenders to assist them, and now he was already faced with another crisis. He couldn't sit around and wait for Killian to succeed or fail. As a red dust immortal, there had to be something he could do to help. Stephen quietly went over to Killian and crouched beside him. His complexion had slightly improved, and he wasn't writhing in pain anymore, but it was hard to tell if this was a sign of progress or if his consciousness was shutting down. Is there anything I can do to help? Killian was prideful, and he never asked for assistance, especially not from a lower species. But desperate times called for desperate measures. The energy from the lake is too overwhelming to digest and absorb at once. It might be easier if there's a way to divide the energy between us, so I can absorb a smaller amount at a time. Stephen glanced at the watch Dr. Dalton had given him. It had the ability to absorb energy. He didn't know how well it would hold up against the essence of a god, but he decided to try. He placed his hand on Killian's back, and violent energy surged through his arm like a flood breaking through a dam. The ice dragon sensed something wrong with Stephen's body and left his spiritual world. It appeared in its human form. Why are you absorbing this much energy? If you're not careful and exceed your limits, your body will break. I know, but this is the only way I could think of. The needle on the watch spun out of control. It was rapidly converting the energy into a harmless state. The original energy had a consciousness, but it disappeared after the conversion. Stephen didn't have to worry about another consciousness taking over his body, but he had to be mindful of how much energy he was taking in. The ice dragon drew an intricate snowflake on the sand. A cool breeze swirled around Stephen. If the energy inside him went out of control, the array would freeze and contain it to prevent his body from being torn to pieces. Killian's condition stabilized in half an hour. He'd absorbed the energy and transferred it to his main body. He stood up and stretched, feeling refreshed and energized. There was no trace of his earlier struggle. You're more useful than I thought. We're working together. It's only right for me to lend you a hand, Stephen said humbly. Killian grinned. I'll make sure to reward you accordingly. Davos might not be the only one guarding the lake. If they wanted to deal a heavy blow to the tribes, they'd have to change their targets. Most of the Asuras were gathered in the village, leaving their territories defenseless. A massive gray shark descended from the clouds. Killian mounted the beast, while Stephen leaped onto the back of the ice dragon. They took to the skies. Killian had accumulated enough energy in his main body. It was time for him to return to the mausoleum at the bottom of the swamp. Once he awakened, the balance of power in the Asura realm would shift, and a new era would begin. The swamp had returned to the way it was before Stephen bombarded it with fire. Killian stood by the shore and mumbled an incantation. The moonlight dimmed and the water formed a vortex. The metal plate shifted, exposing the tunnel below. Killian separated from his follower's body. The cloud of black mist shifted into a blurry human form. His follower regained consciousness and respectfully knelt in front of him. As a follower, his attitude was rather pious. "Are you the only one guarding this swamp?" Killian asked. "There were 7 of us in the beginning, but conflicts broke out in the Myriad Mountains from time to time. I'm the only one left." Killian's followers weren't that strong. It was a miracle that one of them had survived until now. He nodded in approval. "Has anyone ever entered the mausoleum?" "No, your followers, including myself, were the only ones who went inside to maintain it. Outsiders were not permitted." Killian parted the water and entered the tunnel. Stephen's team followed him. The path was steep and made of stone. It spiraled into the depths. The damp water vapor and moss covering the stones slowed their descent quite a bit. Eventually, they stopped descending, and the rest of the path led them to a small cave straight ahead. A coffin illuminated by dim lights was at the center. It was covered with engravings of unusual symbols. The lid opened a crack, and Killian's mist seeped inside. A wave of aura swept the cave, lighting up the murals and carvings of beasts on the walls. Stephen felt like he'd returned to an ancient and primitive time. The lid was pushed aside, and a toned young man of tall stature stepped out of the coffin. Everything about him was ethereal and otherworldly, but his most noticeable features were his golden irises with vertically slit pupils, vibrant beast tattoos, and snowy white hair that fell to his waist. Killian rolled his shoulder and tested his joints. "Another cycle begins. I gain new insights every time I awaken." He fixed his striking gaze on Stephen. "You're an interesting young man. I wouldn't have awakened this soon if it weren't for you." The moment Killian stepped out of the coffin, Stephen couldn't sense his aura anymore. It was like he'd merged with his surroundings. If they ever fought, it'd be hard to accurately lock onto him. Killian had struggled against Davos before he awakened, but his main body was more capable of defeating him. "I've always made my gratitude and resentment clear," Killian continued. "I've promised to repay you, and I will fulfill it. I'm going to open the passage to the Beast Treasury. What you get out of it will depend on your luck and skill." The eyes of the beast carving on the stone wall began to flicker. Light gathered at the center of the cave in the whirlpool, and Stephen was drawn inside. He felt the familiar sensation of his mind being jumbled as he was transported to another space. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a strange space. The sky, the ground, and everything above him was made of metal. They shimmered in the light and cast eerie shadows. Stephen summoned the ice dragon. "Do you see those beast statues? They're made of metal. I hope they don't come back to life." The ice dragon flicked its tail at a metallic mammoth statue. It didn't shatter from the heavy blow, nor did it shift positions. "Try melting it. There could be something inside." Stephen materialized his sword and condensed the Killian's fire. The heat of thousands of degrees Fahrenheit melted the exterior of the statues like chocolate exposed to the sun. The metal cracked, and beasts leaped out from within. They shifted into human forms with scales, fur, and stripes on their skin. They reminded Stephen of Herman and Amanda's group of orcs. Maybe their power was derived from beasts from another world. "You're bold for a human," one of the orcs said condescendingly. "The treasury is for beasts." "The celestial beast invited me here. Why do you make things easy for me and show me what valuables you're hiding?" "God or not, the end result will depend on your skill." The orcs charged at Stephen. The ice dragon circled the air and dove for them. Its wings and claws brushed their skins, but there was no sign of injury. Stephen circulated his inner energy and increased his speed, leaving behind after images as he rushed into the crowd. The orcs made no move to dodge. Their scales and fur deflected his strikes. 2 orcs surrounded him from both sides. He blocked the first attack, but the second came right after. Stephen took a few hits to the chest and stepped back with a curse. His inner energy was thrumming, and his internal organs ached. Fortunately, his ribs weren't fractured, but he couldn't help but wonder what these orc-like beings ate to get this strong. The ice dragon was occupied with another group of orcs. Be careful, they were created from metal, including their insides. One of the orcs laughed in amusement. "As expected of a dragon, you see right through us. Why would a beast like you follow a weak human cultivator? Aren't you afraid of tarnishing your superior bloodline?" As soon as these words left his mouth, a blast of cold air swept past him. Frost condensed on his skin, freezing him in place. My master's strength is not something you lowly beasts can understand. Give us what we're looking for if you want to be spared the pain. The orcs weren't fazed. Can't you see the statues around you? There are too many to count. When they awaken, you two will be turned into corpses. Stephen knocked back the two orcs and assessed the statues. They weren't boasting. The number of statues gave them an overwhelming advantage. He mounted the ice dragon. It spread its wings and soared into the sky. The sky's made of metal. We could try shattering it to get out of here. You don't want to find the valuables before leaving? The ice dragon asked. We should secure an escape route first. The metallic ceiling resembled the sky from the ground, but the closer they were, the more artificial it looked. The orcs watched their every move. Wings spread from their backs, and they flew after them. The metal constructs could be melted and molded at will. There was no way out, at least not through the sky. The dense crowd of orcs were rapidly approaching. Stephen braced himself for another fight. He materialized the illusory pearls. They shot through the air and crashed into the orcs. The ice dragon flapped its wings, and a blizzard dispersed the orcs' formation. While they were trying to regain their balance, Stephen threw out his chain, wrapping it around their wings. His flames trailed down the chain and set the orcs on fire. When their metal exterior melted, they shifted into another form. In this strange space, they were invincible. I still have some of the energy Killian consumed inside me. I can try using it to condense a phantom to deal with these metallic life forms. Don't create anything strange, the ice dragon warned. If you lose control over it, we'll have another enemy on our hands. Stephen released the energy he absorbed from Killian. A massive Asura hundreds of feet tall manifested before him. From his appearance and his aura, he was most likely the Asura king. His horns glowed, and streams of light enveloped the orcs. Their metallic exterior was like a piece of paper against the light. They were vaporized on impact. The Asura king had created a blood-red lake. It was one of the most sacred places in the entire realm. This is only a phantom of the Asura's ancestor, and it's already this powerful. No wonder the tribes were able to take over the realm with their bloodline inheritance. There are many species beyond the human realm, the ice dragon explained. Humans are the only cultivators who train using martial arts manuals. There's a divide between cultivators and non-cultivators among humans. Other species place more importance on bloodline inheritance, and each species corresponds to a certain classification of strength in the hierarchy. More metallic statues on the ground shattered, and another crowd of orcs flew into the sky. The phantom knocked them away with its earth-shattering attacks. Stephen was interested in the strange metallic material. When the ice dragon landed on the ground, he summoned the thread worms. Can this metal replenish your energy like ores and crystals? Yes, they contain energy. The thread worms stuck close to the ground and slithered to the broken statues. They opened their mouths and swallowed them whole. The beasts of the Asura realm had a special digestive system. When the threadworms swallowed the metallic fragments, the gastric fluid inside their stomachs formed a membrane to prevent corrosion, allowing them to absorb the fragments' energy. When the threadworms had their fill, they returned to Stephen's side and circled him excitedly. How do you feel? We've reached the stage of evolution. There's a large amount of energy contained inside that metal. Does your species evolve? Stephen asked incredulously. You don't need to cultivate like the flood dragon? Do you evolve just by eating and drinking? That's right. To us, hunting is cultivating. Beasts weren't capable of extensive, complex thinking like humans, but it was easier for them to cultivate. All they needed to do was devour other species and energy-rich resources to progress in their cultivation. The color of the threadworm's scales changed from silver to a shiny shade of lavender. They also gained another row of sharp teeth. Thank you for the feast. We've stored the metal inside our stomachs. These materials will be useful for modifying and upgrading weapons. Stephen made a mental note to send the preserved metallic resources to the Research Institute when he got back. As the Phantom continued its onslaught, the number of metallic statues decreased. The orc-like life forms created from metal hesitated and became more wary. When Stephen bound them with his chain, the ice dragon swept through the air and dispersed them with a clean cut, turning them back into scraps of metal. The threadworms had a good appetite. They devoured everything in their path. The Phantom disappeared, and Stephen was ready to find the valuables. The threadworms offered to search. They opened their mouths, dropping a cluster of snakes on the ground. They spread out and burrowed into the depths. Less than 1 hour later, the metallic ground, as smooth and reflective as a mirror, was covered in sparkling chests. Stephen was about to reach for one of them when Killian's voice echoed. "You're only allowed to choose one. What you get will depend on your luck." "Why? There are so many chests here." "That's the rule. Defeating the metallic statues earns you one reward." Stephen's anticipation dropped to the bottom of the valley. He'd wasted so much time and energy on the metallic life forms for one chest. He reached out and placed his hand on the first chest he saw. The space blurred and he was transported back to the cave. "You found the chests much faster than I thought you would. Open it and see what's inside." Stephen looked down at the chest in his hands. Killian sounded much more curious than him. "You could have told me what to expect before sending me into the strange space. All that work for one chest isn't worth it." "A cultivator shouldn't be greedy," Killian chided. "Thank you for your guidance," Stephen said with a sigh, lifting the lid. There was a necklace made of beast fangs inside. He picked it up and sensed a mix of aura from different beasts. Killian nodded approvingly. "It'll be useful in battle. You'll find out what it does when the time comes." "Can't you just tell me?" "We don't belong to the same species. There's no such thing as a teacher and student between us. You'll have to figure it out on your own." Killian had never established a faction, nor had he taken on any students. His followers were the closest people to him, and that wasn't going to change just because Stephen had helped him awaken. When Stephen was inside the metallic space, Killian had tied back his hair and strapped the weapons inside the coffin on his person. His new look was majestic and imposing. It suited the god of beasts. Stephen could feel his ambition. "What's the plan?" "I need to inform the beasts in the Asura realm of my awakening. It'll take some time for them to gather. I'll wait for them on the Myriad Mountains. Are you worried about the rift?" "I am," Stephen admitted. He didn't know if the tribes had succeeded in forcing the exorcists to follow them to the village. The chiefs were ruthless, and no matter how powerful the exorcists were, they would eventually be forced to give in. Killian introduced his followers. "This is Briar. If you need help, let him know. He'll assist you. I've given him some of my power. He'll be useful in a fight." While Stephen was on his journey with Killian, the Asuras looked everywhere for the thieves, but they couldn't find them. There were no leads. More than a dozen warehouses had been ransacked. The chiefs were too preoccupied with the village to care. A celebration with firecrackers and drums was taking place. Delicacies and liquor were placed out on the tables. The main characters of the celebration were the three exorcists. Drew and Rio were expressionless as the festivities continued around them. The chiefs were much stronger than the expedition team led by their elder. If they kept refusing and fell out of the tribes, the chiefs would lead an army into the mountains to threaten them. Nullifying spiritual energy was useless when an army and artillery were involved. The four chiefs, Tartador, Spence, Kagan, and Drake, invited the exorcists to the table. "Thank you for coming. We had no choice but to trouble you. You can ask for anything in exchange for removing the silver netting. Our realm is a barren wasteland. We can't develop unless we take over the prosperous human realm." Drew and Rio had no interest in conflict. They nodded indifferently. "There are different types of barriers and spatial rifts. There's no guarantee we can remove the silver netting. Don't be disappointed if we fail." "The abilities of an exorcist are widely known," Tartador said. "We ask that you do your best. For now, enjoy the festivities and we'll resume our discussion tomorrow." During the middle of the celebration, Stephen arrived on the outskirts of the village with his team. He glanced up at the black hole. There were no changes. The silver netting was in place, but he was still worried. The patrolling Asuras didn't notice that they were being monitored. After doing a quick sweep of the premises, they sat down and grumbled about their responsibilities. If they weren't on duty, they could have joined in the festivities. Stephen used the illusory pearls to observe the village from a bird's-eye view. The four chiefs were dressed extravagantly compared to the rest of the Asuras. They were eye-catching in the crowd. Three familiar faces were sharing their table. It was the exorcists. The chiefs had probably used force to make them leave the mountain and destroy the silver netting. Stephen had nothing against the exorcists, but as things stood, they'd remove the silver netting as soon as the festivities were over. Once the barrier was broken, the Asuras would be free to come and go between their realms. All hell would break loose. He couldn't let that happen. There were hundreds of thousands of Asuras stationed at the village. It was risky, but he had to kill the exorcists. Their existence was a threat to every realm. The festivities continued for an entire night. The Asuras enjoyed themselves to their heart's content. The next morning, the chief impatiently ordered the exorcists to remove the silver netting. Luan placed an ancient cauldron below the black hole. It burned with flames of 7 colors. The spiritual energy of the realm poured into the cauldron. The Asuras felt like they were trapped in a vacuum, separating them from the outside world. Drew and Rio used their blades to draw a strange formation on the ground. The exorcists finished their preparations in 1 hour. The 7 colored flames around the cauldron hovered and floated towards the black hole. Stephen materialized the spear he took from Phantasma Isle's treasure vault. It was the only valuable method he had to catch the exorcists off guard and kill them from a distance, but he wasn't sure if it would work. The exorcist cultivations were equivalent to the red dust immortal realm by human standards. The threadworms, ice dragon, and flood dragon infused the spear with their energy. Stephen locked onto the exorcist auras and threw the spear. It split into 3 beams of light and pierced a hole through their chests. The impact crushed their internal organs. The assassination had happened so quickly that none of the Asuras noticed until the exorcist collapsed. Killian's follower, Briar, rushed into the village to take the cauldron. Tardador was the first to recover from his shock. He yelled for his subordinates to stop the assailant and for the medical team to save the exorcists. A group of Asuras drew their weapons and formed a shield around the cauldron. Snatching it was out of the question. Briar unleashed a wave of energy to destroy the cauldron instead, but his attack was absorbed inside when it came in contact. The medical team surrounded the exorcists. Their bodies were cold, and there were no signs of life. They died upon impact, and the flames from the cauldron had been extinguished. Stephen signaled for Briar to come back. The exorcists were dead, and the silver netting was intact. There was nothing else for them to do here. The ice dragon flew over the village and dropped explosives. The dense crowd of Asuras in the village made it impossible for them to escape even if they saw the attack coming. Explosions rocked the village. Smoke billowed into the air and blotted out the sun, turning day into night. The chiefs propelled themselves into the air to kill the ice dragon, but it was faster. With one beat of its wings, it disappeared into the horizon. While the Asuras' attention was on the sky, the threadworms dug a tunnel for Stephen's team. They made a swift escape. The 4 tribes were in chaos. More than half of the village had been destroyed from the explosives. If they didn't have another trump card, their attempt to invade the human realm would end up in their exorcist deaths.